Ever feel like technology is changing faster than, faster than we can keep up?
It's a runaway train sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, and imagine trying to win a war with yesterday's tech. I mean, that's what we're really diving into today.
The wild world of how tech shapes warfare.
Exactly. And we've got a fascinating guide for this deep dive.
War in the Age of Intelligent Machines
Oh,
by Manuel DeLanda.
published back in 1991.
Which is scary how relevant it still is.
Right?
You read some of this stuff and you're like, wait, was this written today?
It's like eerily prophetic.
Yeah, yeah. What I find fascinating is how DeLanda, he doesn't just focus on like the latest weapons.
Right.
He digs into this whole idea of a machinic phylum. It's like almost this hidden force driving technology, especially military tech.
Okay, so like break that down for me. What is this machinic phylum?
So imagine like this kind of invisible hand that's pushing for greater and greater complexity in the things we build, especially when it comes to warfare.
Hmm.
And it's not about some sci-fi scenario with robots taking over, at least not yet. It's more about how innovations build upon each other, like one thing leads to another.
So instead of just looking at a tank and being like, wow, that's a big gun, we need to think about all the little steps that led to it.
Exactly. The engine, the armor plating, even something like, the development of roads that can support the weight of a tank.
Oh, that's interesting.
DeLanda argues that these leaps forward, these big innovations, they're not just random.
Right.
There are these, what he calls singularities.
Yeah.
These points where the existing technology and human ingenuity, they collide.
Okay.
And something new emerges. And the example he uses, the colloidal bullet,
Okay.
revolutionized warfare. And not because it was, slightly better, but because that new shape, which was enabled by advances in manufacturing, massively increased the accuracy and range of rifles.
Right. Which meant no more armies marching shoulder to shoulder towards the enemy. I mean, it's like a totally new battlefield emerged.
It's just a change in the design of a bullet.
Wow. So this machinic phylum, it's sort of like this invisible hand. I like that analogy, guiding how wars are fought, always pushing for that next technological leap, that next big thing. And DeLanda breaks down the evolution of armies into these distinct technological phases, these machinic paradigms, right?
Right, you got it.
So let's talk about those. What are some of those big paradigm shifts that he identifies?
Well, he starts with what he calls clockwork armies,
Okay.
like those of Frederick the Great. Think absolute precision, synchronized movements, like a giant clock on a battlefield.
I can picture that. Rows and rows of soldiers moving in perfect unison.
Exactly.
Although I can also see how one little disruption could throw the whole thing out of whack.
And that's exactly what happened.
So how do we go from clockwork to what's next?
Well, DeLanda, he calls the next phase the era of the motor.
The motor. Okay, so are we talking like literal engines here?
We are, but it's bigger than that.
Right.
Think about the concept of a motor. Speed, power, flexibility.
Okay.
Napoleon, he's the poster boy for this era.
Napoleon.
And we're not just talking about engines here. He applied this concept of the motor to his entire army's organization.
So it wasn't just about the tech, it was about the mindset.
Exactly. Think about the sheer scale of Napoleon's armies, fueled by, mass conscription.
Mm.
He understood the need for adaptability, for speed.
You couldn't be bogged down by rigid formations and slow communication.
Precise.
This was a whole new level of warfare. And this brings us to network armies, which feels very, very familiar in today's world.
Right.
Is this where we start to see the battlefield become, I don't know, interconnected, like that iconic image of the German blitzkrieg?
Precisely. Think tanks and planes, all linked by radio, moving with incredible speed and coordination.
It's like the difference between a chessboard where every move is carefully planned out in advance,
right,
and a game of high-speed ping pong where you have to react in the moment.
You're exactly right. And this is where battlefield awareness, the ability to make decisions quickly, even at lower levels of command, that becomes absolutely vital. It's no longer just about following orders from the top.
Wow. What I find both fascinating and a bit unnerving is that, DeLanda was writing about intelligent machines taking over warfare back in 1991.
It's what makes his work so relevant, so prophetic. he uses this really powerful image, this idea of a bloodless transfusion,
Mm.
to describe this process of how knowledge is flowing from humans into machines.
Okay, so it's not just about machines being, bigger and badder. It's about them inheriting our knowledge and our skills.
Exactly.
Like,
So first, it was simply replicating those, physical actions like
Yeah.
aiming a cannon, which I
Yeah.
think computers now do far more effectively. Then we started programming, tactical and strategic thinking into war games, into simulations, trying to, digitally outmaneuver the enemy.
right. And now, with AI evolving so rapidly, it's about machines that can, potentially learn, adapt, make decisions on the battlefield that were once reserved for seasoned generals.
Which raises some pretty big questions.
It does.
What happens to human judgment in all of this? What does it even mean to be a soldier or a commander when machines are calling the shots?
Right. It's both exhilarating and terrifying. But before we disappear down that rabbit hole, I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea of friction in warfare.
Yeah.
DeLanda, he doesn't just focus on the machines, does he? He also talks about how even the most advanced tech can't eliminate the unpredictable human element.
And he emphasizes how important that is, that friction is inherent in warfare.
Right.
And it's not just about, tanks getting stuck in the mud.
Right.
It's things like, miscommunication, the fog of war, those moments where instinct, gut feeling has to take over. And these are things that are very, very hard to program.
Even into the smartest machines. So even in the age of, AI-powered drones and algorithms guiding missiles, war will always have that element of chaos, of human fallibility.
That's DeLanda's argument. And he says that instead of trying to eliminate this friction, the most effective military leaders, the most effective organizations are those that learn to manage it.
So how do you manage chaos? That feels like trying to herd cats.
Well, DeLanda points to decentralization as being key.
Okay.
Giving individuals, even at the lower levels, the ability to make decisions, to adapt to changing circumstances on the ground. That becomes essential.
Which is interesting because that's exactly what some of these new technologies like network systems, that's what they're supposed to be good at, right? It's
Yeah.
almost paradoxical. The more advanced our tech gets, the more important it becomes to empower those on the front lines.
That's right.
So in this rapidly changing landscape where machines are doing more of the thinking and the fighting, what separates a good soldier or commander from a great one?
It's a question that grows more urgent, I think, every day as technology races forward, far beyond what DeLanda could have even imagined back in 1991. And what's really fascinating, DeLanda, he sees this need for decentralization, self-organization, adaptation, the very things we're talking about in modern warfare,
Right.
as potentially being the key to humans and technology, working together,
Okay.
not just on the battlefield, but to create a more, a more collaborative, less destructive future, potentially.
So maybe there's a glimmer of hope in all of this, that the same forces that are pushing us towards these intelligent machines could also lead us towards a more peaceful world. It's like this strange paradox.
It is a paradox, and it's a possibility that DeLanda puts forward, one definitely worth thinking about. But to understand how we might get there, I think we have to kind of dig a little deeper into his analysis of, how these machinic paradigms have actually played out in military history.
Okay.
Because, remember, each one didn't just bring, new tech. It brought a completely new way of thinking about war itself.
Right, like those clockwork armies that we talked about earlier, Frederick the Great's perfectly synchronized troops. I mean, it's a fascinating image.
It is.
But it also seems incredibly fragile. So what were the real limitations of that clockwork paradigm?
Well, imagine a battlefield, where armies moved with the precision of a giant clock. Soldiers drilled to fire in volleys, to maneuver in perfect formations, everything dictated by a central command. And this was really the military expression of the Enlightenment, right? This era when scientific thinking, the pursuit of order, were all the rage.
Like those intricate clocks from the 17th and 18th centuries, every gear, every spring, essential to keeping the whole thing running.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because as DeLanda points out, this rigid, this top-down structure, which was so effective in its time, it became a liability as the nature of war itself began to change.
So what happened? What threw a wrench into the clockwork, so to speak?
Well, remember all those massive social and political upheavals that we talked about earlier, revolutions, the rise of nationalism. I mean, they created a battlefield where traditional warfare, with its slow, deliberate movements, it was simply outmatched. Armies needed to be faster. They needed to be more flexible.
And that's where Napoleon comes in, right? He was the one who really shattered that clockwork mold.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Napoleon's armies were like a giant engine, fueled by national fervor and this then new concept of mass conscription. And Napoleon, he was a master of logistics. He understood that to win, he needed to be able to mobilize and deploy his forces with a speed and agility that those old clockwork armies, they simply couldn't match.
It's like comparing a horse-drawn carriage to a steam locomotive. Suddenly, you have this whole new level of power and speed at your disposal.
A perfect analogy. And what's often overlooked is that Napoleon's motorized army, this wasn't just about, adopting new weapons like artillery muskets. It was about a fundamental shift in military thinking and in training, even in the social makeup of his troops.
So it wasn't just about having like a faster horse.
Right.
It was about like inventing the train.
Exactly.
So what were some of those key innovations that made Napoleon's army so different, so much more motorized, if you will?
Well, one of the crucial differences was this concept of the multi-purpose infantry soldier.
Yep.
So before you had all these highly specialized units, your musketeers, your pikemen, your cavalry, each with a very, very specific role.
Right.
Napoleon, he created an army where soldiers were trained to fight in a variety of ways, to adapt to these very fluid conditions of the battlefield.
They weren't just cogs in the machine anymore.
Right.
They had to be more versatile, more able to think on their feet, no more standing in a line waiting for orders.
Exactly. And to further enhance this flexibility, Napoleon, he reorganized his armies into these self-contained divisions,
Okay.
each one capable of operating with a degree of independence.
Oh, interesting.
And this gave his commanders much more flexibility in how they deployed their forces, how they responded to the ever-changing situation on the ground.
So it's like a company that's restructuring into smaller, more agile teams, each one with its own expertise, but able to work together seamlessly when needed.
Exactly.
It's fascinating how these military innovations often like mirror what's happening in the civilian world.
Absolutely. And of course, we can't forget about the logistical innovations, the improvements in roads, in communication, in supply lines, all of these things that allowed Napoleon to move his armies with this unprecedented speed and efficiency.
So the motor paradigm, it was about speed, it was about flexibility, it was about adaptability,
Of course.
harnessing not just new technologies, but new ideas, new ways of organizing, even new social forces, like you said, with mass conscription,
Right.
to create this war machine unlike anything that had come before. But as you mentioned earlier, the story doesn't end there. This evolution, this drive toward greater and greater complexity, it leads us to the networked armies that really define modern warfare.
Exactly. And it's the natural progression. You go from this single powerful engine to this network of interconnected parts, all working together with incredible precision. Think about those German tanks and planes that we talked about earlier, all linked by radio. Their movements coordinated in real time.
Yeah, it's like upgrading from a single computer to a vast interconnected network. So what are the implications of that kind of a shift for how wars are fought?
Well, for one thing, it requires a complete overhaul of command and control structures.
Yeah, okay.
Networked armies, they rely on decentralized decision-making. Commanders at every level, they need to be empowered to act on the information that they have, to make split-second decisions that could, determine the outcome of a battle.
Wow.
So it's about agility, it's about responsiveness, it's about the ability to adapt to a constantly changing battlefield.
It's fascinating how this need for decentralization, which DeLanda identifies as being so crucial for managing friction in warfare, it's almost like it's amplified by the very technologies that are making warfare more complex and interconnected. It's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. The tools we create to manage complexity end up demanding even more adaptability from us.
It really is this fascinating paradox.
Yeah.
And it brings us back to that crucial point that DeLanda keeps returning to, the human element.
Right.
Because no matter how sophisticated our weapons become, no matter how interconnected the battlefield, there will always be that unpredictable human factor to contend with.
And that's where this idea of the bloodless transfusion becomes especially relevant, isn't it? It's not just about machines getting smarter. It's about the knowledge, the intuition, even the fear and courage of human soldiers and commanders being gradually, I don't know, encoded into algorithms, into artificial intelligence.
Precisely. It began, with those very basic physical skills, aiming a cannon, loading a musket, those being transferred to mechanical systems. Then, as warfare grew more complex, we started, encoding tactical and strategic thinking into war games, into simulations, trying to gain an edge over the enemy.
Right.
And now, with the rise of artificial intelligence, those lines between human and machine decision-making, they're blurring even further. It's no longer just about following, pre-programmed rules. It's about machines that can potentially learn, adapt, even anticipate the enemy's moves in ways that might even surpass human capabilities.
Wow.
And that brings us to the really big question, the one that DeLanda wrestles with throughout the book. In this new era of warfare where machines are playing an ever-increasing role, what is the role of human judgment, of ethics?
Yeah.
And what will it mean to be a soldier?
Yeah. To
be a commander, even to be a citizen in a world where that line between human and machine on the battlefield is becoming increasingly difficult to even define?
Right. It's a daunting thought, and one that I think speaks to this deep anxiety that we have about technology, especially when it comes to something as potentially destructive as war. But before we delve into those ethical considerations, which are incredibly important,
Yeah.
I want to take a closer look at some specific examples of how this machinic phylum, this drive towards greater complexity in warfare, has actually played out in history.
Absolutely, because it's in those specific examples, in those moments where technology and human ingenuity collided on the battlefield, I think that we can really start to grasp the profound impact that this machinic phylum has had on the course of history.
So let's maybe start with one of the most obvious examples, one that DeLanda explores in depth.
Yeah.
The evolution of artillery. I mean, from cannons to missiles, we've always been fascinated by big guns, haven't we?
We have, and for good reason. Because artillery, it really represents this fundamental shift in the relationship between technology and warfare. Think about it. For centuries, warfare was largely a matter of hand-to-hand combat, right? Swords, spears.
Look up close and personal.
Exactly. And then gunpowder arrives on the scene. And suddenly you have this weapon that can project force over vast distances with devastating impact. It completely changes the geometry of the battlefield.
And I imagine it also, changed this psychology of warfare as well. You know that at any moment, this cannonball could come crashing down on you from miles away.
It did. And it led to this whole new kind of warfare, one where siegecraft, fortification, became absolutely paramount. Cities built massive walls, that were designed to withstand cannon fire. Fortresses, they became these elaborate puzzles. Each side was trying to outmaneuver the other to find that weak point in their defenses.
It's like a deadly game of chess played on a grand scale with cities and armies as the pieces.
That's a great way to put it. But what's really interesting is that DeLanda doesn't just focus on the technology of artillery itself. Yeah. He also looks at how it transformed the very organization and tactics of armies.
Yeah.
Because in order to operate these new weapons effectively, you needed a whole new kind of soldier.
Right. It's not like you could just hand a cannon to a farmer and say, go fight a war.
Exactly. Artillery, it required specialized knowledge, it required training, it required organization. You needed engineers to design and build the cannons, gunners that were trained to operate them accurately, safely. This led to the creation of these specialized units within armies. A division of labor that we still see today, right?
Yeah.
A direct reflection of the increasing complexity of warfare.
It's like any other industry. You start with, a few skilled craftsmen.
Right.
And then as the technology advances, you get this increasingly complex network of specialized workers and machines, each with a specific role to play.
A perfect analogy. Mm-hmm. And this specialization, it wasn't just limited to the battlefield itself. Artillery also required sophisticated logistics. You had to transport these massive cannons. You had to supply them with gunpowder, with shot. You had to maintain them in the field. This put an even greater emphasis on organization, on planning, on the ability to move men and materials effectively. over long distances.
So artillery wasn't just a new weapon, it was really a catalyst for this whole series of changes in the way that wars were fought and the way that armies were organized.
Exactly, and it's a perfect example of how DeLanda's machinic phylum works. How a single technological innovation, gunpowder in this case, can have these ripple effects throughout an entire system.
Yeah.
Driving these profound changes in organization, in strategy, even in the social and economic fabric of a society.
It's like this domino effect.
Yeah.
One technological innovation knocks over the next, leading to this cascade of changes that can be really difficult to predict, let alone control.
A very apt comparison. And artillery is just one example. DeLanda, he identifies similar patterns in the evolution of other key technologies. Firearms, communication systems, even something as seemingly mundane as the factory.
Okay, so let's talk about firearms. I can see how they fit into this narrative of increasing complexity and changing the face of warfare, but what were some of the specific ways that they shifted the balance of power on the battlefield?
Well, before firearms, battles were fought at a relatively close range.
Right.
You had to be within a few hundred yards to hit your target with a bow and arrow, even less with a sword or a spear.
Yeah.
But with the firearms, suddenly you have this weapon that can project force over much greater distances with significantly more accuracy, at least the potential for accuracy.
Well, right.
So no more charging into battle with swords drawn. Firearms completely changed the rules of engagement.
Right, so they do. And as firearms became more sophisticated, we go from muskets to rifles to machine guns, they had this really profound impact on the tactics and the organization of armies. I mean, one of the most striking examples is the rise of trench warfare in World War I.
Right.
A direct result of the incredible firepower of the machine gun.
Exactly.
These brutal static battles where soldiers were just mowed down by thousands. I mean, it's hard to imagine the horror of it all.
It was a horrific new chapter in the history of warfare.
Yeah.
And it was made possible by the machine gun's ability to create these impenetrable barriers of lead.
Yeah.
Armies were forced to adapt. They had to dig in. They had to find new ways to break through those fortified lines.
Yeah.
Which led to the development of even more horrific weapons like poison gas, tanks.
Yeah. It's a terrifying illustration of that arms race mentality.
Look at this.
Every new weapon creating a new vulnerability, every defensive measure countered by an even more devastating offensive capability.
Precisely. And firearms, they're just one piece of the puzzle. DeLanda also talks about the crucial role that communication systems have played in the evolution of warfare.
Which makes sense, right? From carrier pigeons to radios to the internet, the ability to communicate quickly and effectively. I mean, that can be just as decisive as any weapon.
Absolutely. And DeLanda, he highlights some really fascinating examples of how communication technology has literally changed the map of the battlefield. One of the most dramatic shifts came with the invention of the telegraph back in the 19th century.
Right.
So for the first time, commanders, they could communicate with their troops in near real time, even across these vast distances.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a more dramatic shift. It's like going from sending a message by horseback to having instant messaging.
It really was a revolutionary development, and it had a profound impact on warfare. Suddenly, armies could be, coordinated with much greater precision. Commanders could direct their forces more effectively, react to changing circumstances more quickly. They could exploit enemy weaknesses as they emerged.
It's like the difference between playing a game of chess by mail and playing it, in real time online.
Right.
The speed of communication changes everything.
Exactly. And the telegraph, that was just the beginning. With the invention of the radio in the early 20th century, communication became even faster and more flexible. Now commanders could communicate with their troops on the move, even in the heat of battle.
Yeah, it's hard to overstate what a game changer that must have been.
It was.
Suddenly you have this level of coordination and awareness that was simply unimaginable before.
Exactly. And it paves the way for even more sophisticated, more coordinated military tactics. Think about Think about the blitzkrieg tactics that were used by the German army in World War II.
Right.
These lightning-fast advances, the coordination of tanks and aircraft,
Right.
all made possible by the effective use of radio communication.
So communication technology, it's not just about relaying information.
Right.
It becomes this weapon in its own right.
Precisely. And DeLanda, he argues that this is only going to become more pronounced in the future as new technologies like the internet, artificial intelligence,
Right.
become further integrated into warfare.
Which is both exciting and a bit terrifying, right?
It is.
It makes you wonder if we're approaching this point where the battlefield is just as much a digital space as it is a physical one.
That's a valid concern, and it's one that we're going to delve into more deeply in a moment.
Sure.
But first, I think it's important to touch on another element of DeLanda's machinic phylum that often gets overlooked in discussions of warfare, the rise of the factory.
Okay, factories. Now, I can see how they play a role in producing weapons,
Yeah.
but how do they fit into this bigger picture of the machinic phylum and this evolution of warfare that we've been talking about?
That's a great question, because it's easy to think of factories as just places where things are made, but DeLanda argues that the factory itself is a product of this machinic phylum, that it embodies this drive towards greater complexity, towards self-organization, that we see playing out on the battlefield as well.
So in what way? How does a factory how does it reflect those same principles?
Well, think about the key elements of a factory. The division of labor, the standardization of parts, the use of machines to automate production. I mean, these are all innovations that reflect this underlying drive towards greater efficiency, greater control, that we also see in the evolution of military tactics, of technologies.
So it's like taking those principles of the clockwork army, the precision, the efficiency, the standardization, all geared towards maximizing output and applying them to the production of weapons themselves.
Precisely. And just as clockwork armies eventually gave way to these more flexible, more adaptable motorized armies, the factory itself has continued to evolve. It's incorporated new technologies, new organizational principles,
Right.
to become even more efficient, even more responsive to the changing demands of warfare.
So factories aren't just about producing weapons, they're also about controlling production. They're about maximizing output. They're about applying these principles of efficiency and organization to the very process of making war.
Absolutely. And DeLanda, he points to some fascinating examples of how the factory has shaped the evolution of warfare, not just in terms of the weapons that it produces, but also in terms of how it transforms society itself.
Okay, so for example, how does the factory system, how does it change the social landscape?
Well, think about the impact of mass production on the availability of weapons.
Sure.
So before the Industrial Revolution, only the wealthy and powerful, they could afford to equip themselves with weapons.
Right.
But with mass production, weapons become much cheaper, much more readily available. And this had this really profound impact on the nature of warfare. It made it possible to field much larger armies that were comprised of citizens rather than just professional soldiers.
Right. It's almost like the democratization of warfare, although that term has some problematic implications.
It does, and it also had this really profound impact on the social fabric of nations. The factory system, it created this whole new class of workers, the industrial proletariat,
Right.
who were concentrated in urban centers, working long hours for often meager wages.
Yeah.
And it was these workers who became the primary source of manpower for these new mass armies.
So the factory, it's not just a place where weapons are made. It's also a place where the very conditions for modern warfare are produced. The mass production of weapons, the concentration of workers in these urban centers, the increasing reliance on technology and industrial production to fuel the war machine.
Exactly. And it's all part of this larger story that DeLanda is telling about the machinic phylum.
Yeah.
About how, technological innovation, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
It shapes and is shaped by the social, the economic, the political forces that surround around it.
It's a mind-blowing concept, really. This idea that there's this underlying force driving the evolution of technology, especially in warfare, and
Yeah.
it's not about like good versus evil or anything like that. It's about this constant interplay between human ingenuity and our tools, our machines, always pushing towards, like you said, greater complexity, greater interconnectedness.
Precisely. And that complexity, it brings both, immense challenges and extraordinary possibilities.
Right.
And it's in navigating that tension, in understanding those forces that are at play, that we might be able to shape up a future where technology, even these technologies of war, can be harnessed for a more peaceful and just world.
It's a hopeful thought.
It is.
And one that I think perfectly sets the stage for the next part of our conversation, where we'll delve into implications of all of this for the future of warfare, the rise of artificial intelligence, and really the role of human judgment in a world that's increasingly being shaped by machines.
Yeah.
So we've been really digging deep into this idea of a machinic phylum, this sort of hidden force that DeLanda argues is driving technology, especially in warfare, towards greater and greater complexity.
Right.
But it's not just about, bigger guns and smarter bombs, is it? It's really about how each of these technological leaps forces us to, I don't know, completely rethink how we fight wars, how we organize armies, even how we think about victory and defeat.
It's about adapting to survive, right?
Right.
I mean, you see each of those machinic paradigms that DeLanda outlines, the clockwork army, the motor army, the network army. I mean, they weren't just about, new gadgets. They were complete system upgrades. They demanded a change, not just in our tools, but in our mindset.
Right, like we talked about earlier, going from the rigid formations of Frederick the Great's army to Napoleon's fast-moving, adaptable forces. I mean, that wasn't just a change in weaponry. That was a fundamental shift in thinking about the very nature of war.
Precisely. Frederick's clockwork army, with its emphasis on centralized control, on predictable maneuvers, I mean, it thrived in an era of, what we might call more gentlemanly warfare.
Right.
But Napoleon, he faced a world on fire. I mean, revolutions, the rise of nationalism, the battlefields were chaotic, they were unpredictable.
So how did Napoleon adapt to that new reality? How did he take this concept of a motor of speed and flexibility and apply it to something as inherently messy as war?
Well, DeLanda points to a few key things. Firstly, Napoleon, he championed this idea of the multi-purpose infantry soldier.
Okay.
So instead of these highly specialized units, he needed soldiers who could adapt to any situation, to fight in any terrain. These weren't just cogs in a machine anymore.
Right.
They had to think for themselves. They had to make decisions on the fly.
And it's like the difference between, a specialized craftsman who's a master of one particular skill and a modern day entrepreneur who has to kind of wear multiple hats and adapt to a constantly changing market.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And just like an entrepreneur needs a nimble team, Napoleon, he broke from that rigid structure of previous armies, and he reorganized his forces into these smaller, more self-sufficient divisions.
Okay.
And this allowed them to operate with more independence, to react faster to enemy movements, to exploit opportunities as they emerged.
So in a way, Napoleon was decentralizing his army before decentralization was even a thing,
That's right.
giving more power to those on the ground, trusting them to make the right call when it mattered most.
Exactly.
And again, it sounds a lot like the kind of agility that modern businesses are always striving for.
Absolutely. And this decentralized approach, it was essential for managing that friction that DeLanda talks about.
Right.
The fog of war, the unexpected delays, the breakdowns in communication. Napoleon, he couldn't eliminate friction entirely, but by empowering his officers, his soldiers, he could mitigate its impact.
Which is fascinating because, as you mentioned earlier, that need for decentralization only becomes more important as technology advances. The more complex our systems become, the more interconnected the battlefield, the greater the need for adaptability and quick thinking at every level. It's almost like we're constantly trying to outrun the complexity that we're creating.
It's a paradox, for sure. And it brings us to the very heart of DeLanda's argument.
Yeah.
This idea of the bloodless transfusion. So as our Our weapons, our communication systems become more sophisticated as we rely more and more on artificial intelligence to process information, to make decisions.
Right.
We're essentially transferring those human functions, the ability to adapt, to strategize, to anticipate into the machines themselves.
Yeah. It's a bit like that scene in 2001, A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
You know, HAL, the computer, becomes so intelligent that it starts making decisions that were once the sole domain of humans with terrifying consequences.
Right, a chilling example, and one that I think speaks to the deep-seated anxieties that we have about artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to something as consequential as war, because it raises this question: what happens to human judgment, to morality, to our sense of responsibility when machines are calling the shots?
Right. It's a question that has no easy answers, but it's one that we can't afford to ignore.
We can't.
Because the technology isn't waiting for us to figure it out.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? What does it even mean to be a soldier, a commander, a citizen in a world where the lines between human and machine on the battlefield are becoming increasingly blurred?
Well, DeLanda, he doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but he offers us a framework, I think, for understanding the forces that are at play. And he reminds us that the technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil. It all depends on the choices that we make, the values that we prioritize, the future that we envision.
Yeah. It's a powerful reminder that even in the face of these seemingly unstoppable technological forces, we're not just, passive bystanders.
You're not.
We have agency, we have a responsibility to shape the future, to ensure that these technologies, these tools of war are ultimately used in the service of peace, of justice, of human flourishing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And perhaps, just perhaps, those very forces that DeLanda identifies as driving this technological evolution, decentralization, self-organization, adaptation, they might hold the key to a different kind of future. A future where the interconnectedness, the intelligence that we're building into our machines can also be harnessed to create a more collaborative, a more compassionate, a more peaceful world.
It's a vision worth striding for, a future worth fighting for, and perhaps, as DeLanda suggests, the very technologies that seem to be pushing us towards a more mechanized, a more automated, a more dehumanized form of warfare
Right.
might also hold the key to a more humane, a more just, a more peaceful future.
A future where human ingenuity and compassion are not replaced by, but rather amplified by the power of technology. It's a vision that requires courage, it requires imagination, it requires a willingness to really challenge our assumptions about the very nature of war and peace.
This has been quite a journey. We've dug deep into war in the age of intelligent machines, exploring the evolution of warfare, the impact of technology on the battlefield, and really the profound questions that these advancements raise about the future of humanity.
And we've seen how technological innovation, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right.
It's intertwined with social, with political, with economic forces.
Yeah.
And understanding these connections, I think, is crucial for navigating the challenges and the opportunities of the 21st century.
Absolutely. And from the clockwork armies of the 18th century to the AI-powered battlefields of the future, I think one thing remains clear. The human element, with all of its complexities and contradictions, will continue to shape the course of warfare.
It will.
And it's up to us as informed citizens to ensure that technology that serves humanity, not the other way around.
So as you move forward, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep demanding a future where technology is harnessed for good.
I love that. Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.